Okay. So Professor Gorazd Bajc will speak to us in a very short time on the topic of the issue of minorities in Kosovo. The lecture is titled Problem or Opportunity? What does history teach us? And our guest speaker is brought to us by our fellow Christian Costamagna, who will also host and moderate this event and will act as a respondent to Professor Bajc. So let me just have a few words about Christian Costamagna, and then I'll let him do the honors. So Dr. Costamagna earned his PhD in historical sciences in 2013 from the University of Eastern Piedmont in Italy, with a doctoral dissertation about the political reforms in Serbia and Yugoslavia and the ascent to power of Milosevic during the second half of the 80s. He was interning at the Institute for Contemporary History in Belgrade in 2011, and in 2012 he spent a visiting semester at the Faculty of Arts in Ljubljana, where he was adjunct professor of contemporary history and history of Eastern Europe at the University of Eastern Piedmont too, from 2014 to 2015. Welcome, Professor Bajc. Welcome, Christian. I'll hand over to you. And welcome, everyone.
Thank you, Valeria. And I would like to welcome all the guests and participants. Now I'm going to introduce Professor Gorazd Bajc. So he's a full professor of European history and history of the Balkans at the Faculty of Arts of the University of Maribor in Slovenia, where he is also the Vice Dean for Science and Research. He is the head of the research program, the Slovene Identity and Cultural Awareness in Linguistic and Ethnic Contact Areas in Past and Present. His main fields of research and teaching are the history of international relations, of intelligence services, of anti-fascism, of the Balkans, of Slovenian-Italian relation, and the Slovene minority in Italy, and of the violence against women in Venezia Giulia. He is author of 5 monographs, 41 scientific articles, 37 scientific treatises, and 3 textbooks. He has done research in the archives of London, Rome, Prague, Belgrade, Ljubljana, Trieste, Udine, and Koper. And he participated at several conferences and lectured at various universities. And he is also a member of the board of editors and editor of the high impact scientific journal Acta Historia, and editor of the highest impact scientific journal Annales series Historia et Sociologia. In 2017, the European Commission awarded him the Marie Sklodowska-Curie Actions Seal of Excellence. So today, Professor Bajc, he will present us his speech about the presentation about the issue of minorities and Kosovo. Problem or opportunity? What does history teach us? This presentation will touch different subtopics: how we can understand as historians the dissolution of Yugoslavia and the events that followed, in particular the Kosovo question. There are various ways, and among these, the speaker proposes to take into account one of the most complicated issues in Yugoslav events, that of national minorities, or rather, the problem of nationalities. The speaker will also propose a comparison with some other past situations of interethnic conflicts in the history of the former Yugoslavia, in particular related to border events. The basic question was and still is very relevant in the conflicts of minorities and diversity in general. So now I can maybe share the presentation, the PowerPoint. So, see. Can you see it? Okay. So now I give the floor to Professor Bajc.
Okay, thank you so much, Christian Costamagna. Thank you so much to the organizers, dear colleagues, dear friends. Thank you for the invitation. The PowerPoint is very, very brief. If you want, Christian, you can go to the second slides where I have my initial questions. Okay, thanks a lot. So in my brief introduction, I will propose some questions. Therefore, my presentation is more methodological intervention. Well, the Kosovo issue was not and is still not the only national or minority issue of the former Yugoslavia. And it was not unique in the broader perspective in Europe. And there were also minorities in other states that were simultaneously or in parallel majorities at the regional level. For example, the German minority in Italy. Therefore, that minority is a majority in the north part of the Italian state, in the South Tyrol region, or in the autonomous province of Bolzano, South Tyrol, provincia in South Tyrol. Then, what can minorities offer in the present and in the history? Are they, the minorities, just a factor in the problems? Are there only problems with minorities? In fact, they are potentially a problem, obviously, if politics and society want it. But politics and society can also choose differently. It is true. It is not easy. In fact, it is very complicated. Apparently, it is much easier to solve with homogenization. But with which results? Is there a real perspective if there are forcings? We know many examples in history. Just one example. The policy of Italianization that was pierced by fascism in Venezia Giulia region. When it seemed that the strong state could completely Italianize, there was a strong reaction, even violent, of oppressed citizens, the Slovenes and the Croats. On one side, with weapons, with bombings and sabotage and other violent acts. On the other side, also the Slovenian and Croatian clergy had carried out many clandestine activities, and even they rebelled against the Vatican. Finally, when these oppressed citizens have had their strength, so at the end of the Second World War, they committed revenge and several acts of violence. What was the end result? Italy lost part of the territory conquered 25 years earlier, the Istria and part of the Dalmatia. It is true that Italy's policy against the Slovenian and Croatian minorities was not decisive in changing the state border. But it is true that the powers that decided were well informed about the policy against minorities, and this was not a point in Italy's favor. So, was the fascist policy forward-looking? The result evidently does not prove Mussolini and company right. Is it better Is it therefore better to protect minorities? There are constitutions, special laws for the protection of minorities, European standards, and so on. And for example, the Constitution of Kosovo contains some concernings for minorities, and in particular for the Serbian minority. But this is not enough. Laws to protect minorities must not remain on paper, they must be enforced. To do this, culture is needed. I'm thinking, because I'm a historian, so I'm thinking that in particularly the culture of dialogue and where and how to start from. I'm a historian. Here, the history comes into play. How to propose the history of complicated and especially violent and traumatic events. As a historian, I know that the question did not arise yesterday, but it has a long history. But will the history be accepted by everyone? I hope that mistakes of this kind will not be made here too, because they lead to misunderstandings. History cannot be accepted and shared too simplistically. Sorry. Instead, we must try to give other tools. For example, to try to propose serious researches that need the necessary time and financial means. Instant history is not a good history. Then, also to take in consideration the pain of the so-called the other. We can say this, the so-called shared history. Then try to look more broadly when dealing with minorities to consider a transnational approach. Also, consider the point of view of those who had not been directly involved. Therefore, the external point of view, the so-called, the third party. To do such research, we need, however, the right tools, knowledge of primary source languages, and not only for sources, archive sources, also for literature, knows very well the background, and try not to judge but understand as much as possible the historical dynamics, the why, and use innovative methods. Not very easy, quite difficult, but some researchers are very good in that. Therefore, I would like to congratulate to the Center for Advanced Studies of Southeastern Europe of the University of Rijeka, or Fiume, for giving to Christian Costamagna the opportunity for his research. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you, Professor Bajc, for your presentation and your how you put on the carpet very different, interesting points that needs to be evaluated, discussed, and go forward. Indeed, as you mentioned, the Kosovo issue and the minority issue in Kosovo was, of course, not the only problem at the time in Yugoslavia. that's a topic that along the decades of existence of Yugoslavia, or socialist Yugoslavia, it came to surface different times in different ways. As we know, in 1968, we had the first mass demonstration of Kosovo Albanians, and then after that we had the new constitution in 1974 that granted a full autonomy from Belgrade to Kosovo and Vojvodina, the two provinces at the time Socialist Republic of Serbia. So, and then again, even so, in 1981, 1 year after the death of Josip Broz Tito, we had the first, again, the second mass demonstration of Kosovo Albanians that asked to be to transform and achieve the status of a republic, of Yugoslav Republic for Kosovo. So, but even so, even if, let's say, during the 70s, Kosovo Albanians, they achieved a lot of autonomy and rights compared to the 60s and the previous period. But even so, they were, for them, that status was not considered enough. On the contrary, especially in the first half of the 1980s, we had Serbs and Montenegrins that somehow self-organized themselves to protest against the power in Pristina, let's say the capital of Kosovo. So because they felt and they said that they were mistreated by the Albanian majority in Kosovo, and that those manifestations of the Serbs and Montenegrins were put at the beginning under the carpet by the power in Belgrade at the Serbian and Yugoslav level. But even so, the intellectuals, nationalists in Belgrade, like Dobrica Ćosić and many others, they exploited somehow that issue of Serbs and Montenegrins. So we can see that as Vuk Drašković, the Serb authors, and politicians, of course, he said somehow the intellectuals, nationalist intellectuals, they created the environment and the opportunity to Milosevic to seize the issues of the at the time minority of Serbs in Kosovo. So we have this paradox that if the state give and empower and gives autonomy to a minority, then in this historical example, then we have, on the contrary, other problem with the minority inside the minority. So the Serbs were looking for help from Belgrade, and Milosevic, since 1987, he started, let's say, his political career trying to protect those Serbs and Montenegrins and to stop what was at the time, and this is very interesting, officially the politicians, even before Milosevic, even his mentor, even Stambolic, they publicly addressed the issues of Serbs and Montenegrins in Kosovo in the 80s, during the half of the 80s, as a genocide and of the Serbs made by Albanians, and that's something that was always rejected with disdain by the power in Pristina, the communists in Pristina. So that's, I think, from the historical point of view, we have a clear example of how it is complicated to manage from the political point of view such issues, because probably even without the nationalism and populism adopted by Milosevic since '87, it is quite clear to me that it was anyway very difficult manage the Kosovo issues, minority issues in Yugoslavia. So I think that what happened at that time during the 80s, now we have still we are still somehow observing the consequences and the results of those policies. So if you keep this background in mind, it is on one hand we have the work of the historian to engage with pragmatic resources, engage with to know, of course, the languages of those primary sources, know the archives, know the secondary literature and academic literature. But there is also another very important dimension that somehow goes beyond what is expected from an historian, and it is to connect the past with the present. So now we are, if we think about the present, we have to understand how could historians help to reconcile the region? How can historians try to explain to the general public what happened, what is happening now between Belgrade and Pristina, and to imagine a different future. I mean, a different future in the sense that how the historians, with their insight about the past, how could be imagined a political solution for the Kosovo and Serbia or Belgrade and Pristina dialogue. So do you think that I am posing a question to Professor Bajc, do you think, how do you imagine the role of historians in order to help to find a solution to that so-called Kosovo knot?
Thank you, Christian. But may I ask what's to your historical events that you said? 1968, there was probably the first time for the Serbs, the first alarm about Kosovo, because in Kosovo they asked for the first time the Republic, Kosovo Republika. That was the first alarm. There was a special moment in the Yugoslav history, the so-called liberalization. In Serbia, Nikezic, Latinka Perovic, in Croatia, Tripalo, Savka Dapsović, and so on, and in Slovenia, Stane Kaučić. And but also with that new leadership in Yugoslavia, in Serbia, Croatia, and in Slovenia, more liberal leadership, they didn't find a solution for Kosovo. The role of historian now, the first try to explain the whole history, not only of one part of history. Try to be intellectually honest. I know it's very difficult because from one part or other parts they probably be not very happy with our research, but trying to what I said before, try to use the one transnational perspective or approach, try to find the pain of all of protagonists, or in that kind, Serbs and Albanians in Kosovo, and try to explain to the politics that everything starts with the history. The economy is very important. The strategic point of view is very important, obviously, but for people, everything starts with the history, and that history, the history of the Balkans in the 20th century is very complicated, and is the history in the Balkans in the 20th century is the more violent history in Europe, in South Balkan. And I mean, the first and the second Balkan wars, 1912, 1913. The First World War was very violent. Then the Second World War, and the wars at the end of Yugoslavia, or at the dissolution of Yugoslavia. In that part of Europe, a lot of people have a lot of tragedy, or of parents or of friends. There are not a lot of time to pass from one big violence to other big violence. So the history is crucial. History is crucial, and with the modern approach, not nationalistic history, not history, for example, of one nation, and but history of more nations, or more groups, or more linguistic groups, and so we can say the history of minorities. We know that the minority question in Europe and in the world started only after the First World War, at the Paris Conference. So, but they didn't find the real solutions. Minorities, ethnic minorities, I mean, ethnic minorities after the First World War, they remained alone. They formed in 1925 a special may I say, Congress was the name, Congress of the European, of the national groups, national of the European minorities. But a lot of states, especially the Allied states that won the First World War, they didn't didn't accept that Congress. It was from 1925 till 1938 in Slovene Kongres Europskih narodnosti. But that's Congress that we can say that's very important clap for minorities after the First World War. In that Congress, they started to thinking about the minority questions like a question for human rights, like human rights, and a lot of their ideas are very similar to our today ideas of European Union about human rights. We can say that the big powers in the history in the 20th century, the big powers didn't find a real solution, or it's better to say they didn't want to find a real solution. The minorities were, for big powers, just a problem. They wanted to, for example, to make the big transfer of people, like the example of Turkey and Greece after the First World War. During the Second World War, for example, I made a lot of research in the archives in London, in the National Archives in London, the files of Foreign Office, and the Foreign Office had a lot of plans about the period after the Second World War, and they a lot of time said that the minorities are just a problem, not an opportunity. And so they thought that it will be better to make a lot of transfers of people after the Second World War, like after the First World War. So the community, and so we arrived to the European community, obviously accept some legislation or some papers about minorities, and that is very obviously is very good, but I think it's not enough. It's not enough. We need the culture of dialogue, and the culture of dialogue starts with the history. Start with history, and so starts with us historians. It's a very difficult question, but there are no ways. For example, I think that the Serbs now in Kosovo, they obviously they have their history about the Serbs monasteries in Kosovo and so on. We know that a lot of that were some years ago destroyed. That was not only the destroy of Serbian history legacy, it was destroyed a part of the human legacy, not only of Serbian legacy. So we have a very important role. I hope that politics accept our work. May I okay, I think it's enough for now. Thank you, Christian.
Thank you, Professor Bajc, for all your answers. If I may, I would add just one more comment. You mentioned, and you made a very, among the many, one interesting point. When if you know, if the politician, you said that minorities could be exploited in some way by a politician, by the politics. So somehow, when I think about Yugoslavia, about Kosovo, about Serbia, I am not totally sure where there is the border, the real border between the true and the exploitation, something that it is made in a deliberate way, in a clear way, to exploit the people in order to stay in power. And when it begins the cultural diversity, and when there is where it begins a different way to understand the world and the civilization and the values, because apparently, I have found dissonant, let's say, evidences working in the archives in the past. Because it was clear on one hand that, for example, Slobodan Milosevic, by the end of the 80s, he exploited for political power the issues of nationalism, Kosovo, and so on. That's quite evident, I mean, quite clear. But on the other hand, it is not so clear when sometimes reading his speeches and talks with other politicians behind closed door, reading the transcript of his phone intercepts that the Croatian army made in the 90s. There is the reader get the impression that he really believed in his ideas about how the West destroyed and Germany destroyed Yugoslavia, how they were trying to defend the Serbian people against foreign aggression. There is, for example, one interesting phone intercept of Milosevic made in 1996, at the end of 96 by the Croatian army intelligence. And while talking with another Serb politician close to him, he said that he feared that the Serbs could become like Kurds in the Balkans, people without a state. And it is strange because, on the other hand, in December 95, reading the speeches he made with the Supreme Council of Defense of Yugoslavia, he was saying in December 95 at the Dayton, at the time of the Dayton Agreement, he was very happy with the Dayton Agreement. He was happy by what Americans say offered to Serbia and also to Republika Srpska, because he believed that even if Serbs they lost Knin and the Republika Srpska Krajina in Croatia, they had achieved their goal to have also a Serb republic in Bosnia and Herzegovina. So there is somehow a dissonant perception about when the politician is exploiting, let's say, nationalism and in order to stay in power, and the ingenuity maybe of the citizens and electors. But on the other hand, there are some maybe few moments when there is the impression that there is something cultural, a different cultural perceptions of the historical events. That's just my impression, that what you said before, he brought to my mind something that I was thinking about. I don't know if you have any comments about that, and maybe after that it will be time to give the floor to the participants that surely they will have some questions for you. Thanks.
Yes, thank you.
I'm looking if Professor Bajc doesn't have additional comments. I will look if there is some participant who would like to pose questions.
Me? Sorry.
Yeah,
Hi, I'm Letizia. Thank you for this for this dialogue. It was very, very interesting. I have one question. I have seen these topics from the viewpoint of Hannah Arendt, which treated these topics, particularly the theme of the minorities. And she points out to the fact that maybe the different law for the minorities, that is a particular kind, a different status of citizenship, meant somehow recognition that some people are different from others, and that the status of the minorities, which was recognized after the end of the First World War, was somehow meant somehow preparing the assimilation of these people. As you said, it was not a real solution to the problem. Therefore, my question is not methodological, but it is more political or maybe also philosophical. Should the minorities be an opportunity also for changing the international law about the status of the states, that is, should we not consider changing the foundation of our countries on the basis of ethnicity? This is my question. I don't know if it is clear or if I...
May I answer? I say yes. May I say yes? For example, I'm living in Trieste in Italy, but I'm Slovene, so because in Trieste, but not only in Trieste, lives a Slovene minority, and I know very well about that's problems. The problem is that politics, or one part of politics, is better to say, tried here, and I think in other parts also, to give every time a contrast between the minorities and the minority and the majority. The majority, I think, will not lost nothing if a minority has some rights. It will be opposite. The majority has, I think, will have only a lot of advantages from the rights of minorities. For the politics, there are not ethnic problem, because ethnic problems are very complicated. On the other part, a minority could give to the majority a lot of other things. For example, a more interesting culture, a more interesting, I think, not only culture, the classical culture, I think, for reading or so on, but more interesting, for example, more interesting food and other kind of drinks. May I say, I'm living like you in Europe, I think. I want to go from the Portugal to, for example, Poland, or for Portugal to Greece, for example, and I want to see on the on the streets a lot of diversity. I want to eat not the same food or drink the same drink in every place. Europe is that. In Europe, we have a lot of minorities. It's quite difficult to say how many minorities and how many members of minorities, because it's quite difficult to make numbers, exact numbers. But Europe is made with minorities, by minorities. Minorities. Okay, it's very interesting. Another thing, which kind of minorities? For example, or the real society will not be with the assimilation rule, but the real integration. For example, a lot of children here, for example, here in Trieste, are not only for have not only parents from one ethnicity, but mixed families. For example, my daughter spoke. She speaks now, but she spoke at the beginning 3 languages. My Slovene, then the Friulano of my wife, of the Friulani, the minority of Friulani, and the Italian, like the common language. A minority could give to the majority the opportunity to know more, more history, more culture, and to understand more another state. I think I'm not a lawyer. I know the laws about the minority, in particular here in Italy, about the minority of Slovene. But a law is very complicated, and it's a law will not be good without the application of law, and the application of law is applied by politics. So the minority is a very, very big question for the majority about the human rights. I don't know if I answered to your question.
Yes,
more.
thanks. Thank you very much.
Okay, so now Mikhail raised his hand, please.
Hello, do you hear me well? Great, thank you very much for the interesting conversation. And my question is maybe a little bit off the topic, but the question is about whether the technology and specifically internet is changing the political dynamics, cultural dynamics of minorities in Europe. I hope the question is relevant. Are there any systemic research? Are there any significant changes in the recent years?
I think yes, but like the other society, the problem of minorities are linked with the big afraid to lose the identity, obviously. But the big question is, what is a real identity of a minority or a majority? Not only the language and the literature connected with the language. There are other topics of the identity. For example, the identity about our kind of dressing. For example, the minority of Slovene people in Italy before the dissolution of Yugoslavia, the members of the minority, I saw, like me 30 years ago, we were dressing more in an Italian style than a style of Yugoslavia, for example. Is that a problem for a minority to lose the real identity? I think no. And like that is the technology. In internet, we can find everything. A lot of not good things, but a lot of very useful things. But I think the technology, the internet, is the web is like our car. If you want to drive safely to your parents, okay. If you're not conscious, you can you could death on the road. The same is with the technology. I think with the internet, the technology is not good for other things, for our society, for our children, and so on. But that's another kind of problem, I think.
Thank you. So now there is Ares that raised his hand, please.
Well, hello. Thank you for the opportunity and the seminar. I'm Ares from Prizren in southern Kosovo. I'm also a part of Albanian majority, but I'm also partly Turkish and partly Bosnian, three of the 4 or 5 recognized ethnic groups in the city. So I come from multiple perspectives, but also there have been so many topics and layers and views from identity, law, history, war, politics, and so on, and how these interplay with the many ambitious questions and topics that were subject of the presentation and conversation. I have maybe to try to be clear, one sort of comment and one question. The comment, I mean, my feeling was that the Kosovo narrative was too much built around, I mean, Kosovo in post-Second World War was too much built around 68, 74, 81, 89, these key numbers, or 81, 86, 89. But there are 2 or 3 important historical sort of foundations to them. One is the end of the Second World War and the position of Albanians and the status of Albanians as a minority. For example, a population larger than Montenegrin population, much larger, but not recognized as a co-founding sort of nation, but being recognized as a minority. Also, like not being a Southern Slav in a Slavic federation that is called Southern Slavia, but then still being big enough to be a problem, as you know, we usually refer to Kosovo. But then the second layer is after the Second World War. It is the Rankovic era and the agreement between Rankovic and Gerard Bayar in Turkey, and the expulsion or the exchange or the transfer of Muslim population, especially from Kosovo and Macedonia that were Albanian and Turkish speaking, and that were a core minority group and were also the core of a middle class that vanished and changed the cultural, social fabric. At the time, I think it's also important to get an understanding of the position of this particular type of southern minority, and also the history with which it came, but also where it went and how that left the things. I mean, and of course, you know, you can go also to the second and the first Yugoslavia and how it came down to the south, to Prizren or to this area, and what kind of consequences or effects it had. And we've been, we are a small foundation. We've been preserving old Yugoslav cinema, maybe the last building in Kosovo with a Tito portrait in it. So in a way, we are trying to understand among the many empires and their residues in this small town and all these micro histories, how they relate to the bigger picture. And I think these were important in order to go in depth to understand the Kosovo narrative. And the further we are from here, of course, these details start to get fuzzy. So I mean, in maybe in a future instant or in a better time and space constellation, we could have a longer conversation about that. But my main problem when I think of history and nationalism and the Kosovo-Serbia question, the core problem is that there are, well, first, there is two powers with major discrepancy in terms of history, state apparatus, institutional, academic, societal capacity to produce narratives, history, and all of these things for a number of reasons, and that's an important discrepancy, but also the recent history of, let's say, public education about history. How does the public get their vague understanding of history and what happened? And especially now in last 30 years, for example, or 40 years, if you look into, if I go to Belgrade now, I'm 95% or people in Belgrade or more have never been to the south. So they have, they've seen the NATO bombings in '99 in their city. They've seen the public television and all other forms of media and their narrative, and then also the Albanian mythology. And that is the point of view, which brings you a limited understanding of what went through and why things happened and how they came about. And if they are subject to it for 30, 40 years, it happens that for the same topic, there are two completely oppositional narratives and perceptions and models of reality being formed. And how do you expect to have a political, a popular, a societal consensus about many complicated issues while having a completely opposing understanding of history? And then, what is the role of historian in this? Is it possible even in the next, I don't know, 20, 30 years to get to a point when, we can talk about 20th century, call things for what they are, and, get a sense of justice with a little bit of freedom beyond the, geopolitical predominant sort of agenda that needs to narrate the main history or kind of play to the emotions. So I mean, I don't know how clear it was as a question and position, but I think this is one of the core problems that I see, because you might get people to sign an agreement, but if there is no understanding, acceptance, like a human level understanding of what went on, I feel it's going to be really difficult to speak of any kind of real stable reconciliation process.
Ares, thank you so much. I will just add something, and probably then Christian will continue. Very concretely, how to very concretely increase history hours in schools and not decrease the history hours in schools. And that is a phenomenon in a lot of states. Then is the big question, which kind of history in schools, which kind of history manuals? That's firstly, there are the basic research of from historians like Christian Costamagna now for Kosovo issues and so on. And then their research will be introduced in the new manuals. In some case in Europe, we have I know the case of common history manuals for school for Germany and France, for example. Sometimes I heard about common manual for history for schools for Italy and Slovenia, but I think it will be very nice of course, but Italy and Slovenia had a very important historical commission that they started in the first years of 19th and they ended 2000 or 2001, and they produced a common report of Italy of Slovenian Italian or Italian Slovenian history, a common report only just 35 pages, but the common view of the more violent common history. And that was a real commission. I think 7 historians from the Slovenian part and 7 of the Italian part. That was very concrete. But to produce that concrete results, we need at the beginning the concrete research, original research. And that's a lot of time the problem for researchers in academic world, that's we have not a lot of support, not only historians, the humanities, the humanities or social sciences, we have not a lot of support from the politics, not only financial support, in general. For example, a lot of politics say that the humanities studies at the universities are not very important. I think in your case and in other cases, they're opposite. They are very important, like technology, like other sciences, but the humanities and so the history is very important too. Christian, I give you the microphone. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Bajc. Well, the questions and the comments made by Ares is very, very interesting, because indeed we often faces very big narratives. Those big narratives are conveyed and produced by the states, by members of the public administration working in the research centers, at the universities. So, and they are, let's say, shared and on the TV channels and news media and so on. So very often those big narratives have some, let's say, some holes, they miss some pieces of the whole story. And I think that what you mentioned, I mean, there is much more than that. We should and pay more attention also from the local history, the history of the local communities, and how they experience it. Those tragical events, for example, during the 90s. That's something extremely important. If I have to think about my limits in my research endeavor, is if I address, for example, the Kosovo and Serbia, Kosovo war as issues, I don't know Albanian language. I do know Serbo, Serbo-Croatian, Nashki, whatever, but I don't know Albanian language. And for me, it is, I recognize and I am aware that is a great limit. So that's one. So I can't, for example, read the books published in Albanian language. I can't make oral interviews in Albanian language, of course, and so on. So that's some part of the obstacles in addressing a history, a piece of history that it is indeed transnational from this point of view. On the other hand, if we look at the, for example, the how in the public spaces in Serbia in the last years, especially the narrative about the Kosovo war, they, for example, it is easy to find some let's say references to the so-called heroes from Kosovo, those Yugoslav soldiers who fought against the Kosovo Liberation Army at the border between Kosovo and Albania, for example, during the Kosovo War. But it is very difficult, for example, to find information about how the Albanian population lived in Kosovo before the Kosovo War. That's I mean, one thing doesn't erase or cancel the other. But if our goal is to go toward, for example, a reconciliation in the region, if we have to create a narrative, that the narrative should be objective. It should comprehend inside also the other side, also what causes lead, for example, to the creation of the Kosovo Liberation Army, or the people in Kosovo to stand against the Belgrade regime in the night. That's just my comment. I see that Alexander, he raised his hand.
Yes, I would like to thank you for a really interesting presentation and really interesting debate. Well, I have a legal background, and I know that there have been two international courts created as for the events of the former Yugoslavia. One was the Tribunal for former Yugoslavia, created by the Security Council, and the other tribunal was created by the European Union and Kosovo cooperation for the crimes committed by the Kosovo Liberation Army members. And my question is, do you think that these international tribunals somehow promoted or helped the reconciliation of the Balkans, and did it have any impact on the minority protection perspective? Can you think from this angle, perhaps? Some the activity of these courts and the protection of minorities. Did this court somehow help to protect minorities in both countries? I mean, Serbia and Kosovo. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you, Alexander, or Alexander. I don't know how to pronounce. But first, the courts have to judge people and not nations. First of all, and I think people have the necessity to know about the truth, But may try to explain the legal truth is not necessary to be the same of the historical truth. But in some cases, why not? I think there are very important for historians, but that's probably Christian will say more information. For historians, the sources of that tribunals are very interesting, and they are. I think they are. I'm sure, but Christian knows a lot more than me. That there are a lot of sources about that tribunals, right or not?
Yeah. Well, the question of your question, Alexander, is very interesting and very complicated as well. As we know, the ICTY, I am now referring to the first one, to the first tribunal that was created in the first half of the 90s. You know, if we have now to judge and to make some to understand if it had an impact on the reconciliation, it is very difficult to answer, because even if we consider we talk in general terms, and it is always difficult to talk in general terms without taking into account the specific cases. The ICTY contributed to make the public opinion in former Yugoslavia somehow aware of what war crimes were committed in Croatia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Kosovo, but still the reception of of the public opinion in those countries not always had the desired effects. That's a field that it is inside the transitional justice. You know, many books, articles, scientific articles have been published about that, and that is not my specific field, but still, from my point of view, from my impressions along the years, is that the public opinion didn't absorb or understood, not always in the desired and expected way, the works of the ICTY. The example that probably I know better compared to others is the reception of the work of the ICTY in Serbia. And in that case, it is well known that it is very often, if you walk in Belgrade now, but also 10 or 15 years ago, it was perceived by a part of the public opinion in Serbia that the ICTY was created in order to punish only the Serbs. And that's a feeling and an understanding that was, you know, my impression is that it was quite spread, not just among, let's say, the common people, if it is correct to assume that term, but also inside the people working in the institutions and in the political parties as well. So the paradox, if we can talk about paradox, is that even if the ICTY tried in its own way to make some justice, to give somehow justice to the victims of the war crimes, for example. On the other hand, the paradox was that it was believed and interpreted by the public opinion, or part of the public opinion and the political parties, as an enemy somehow of the Serbian people. And that's one. So if what I just said is correct, it is difficult to make a real assessment of the work. I mean, from not just in judging and the trial and the punishment with the life sentence, prison for those who committed war crimes, but it is does the work of the ICTY help to create awareness in the public opinion in Serbia, for example, but not just in Serbia, about what happened during the 90s. I think that it is probably the results are a bit disappointing. Because without, let's say, a work, without a broadcast of more information about what happened when the trial sentences in the Hague, in the ICTY, maybe we can't, let's say, really have an effect, an impact on the reconciliation process. So, and these, let's say, perception about an international tribunal doing something, let's say, against people, it is something that can find, let's say, today also an echo. It is mirrored also in some narratives about the wars in former Yugoslavia in the 90s. So it is not totally detached, but on the contrary, it is strongly interlinked. And we should pay attention about how the intellectuals, the politicians, those who work in the field of culture, but I'm not simply talking about university professors, for example, but also culture in a larger way to intend it, maybe also the music, for example, because it is or the or other way to TV programs, TV series, and there is a lot to think about that. So finally, my last remark is this: that the International Tribunal did a lot of necessary and important work, but it is still to be understood if the impact, the expected impact, was enough in the reconciliation process.
Thank you very much for your
just a little thing.
answers.
May I say thank you? I find in the chats the link to a publication, The Role of Minority Language Media in the Construction of Identity During Middle Childhood. Thank you so much. My wife is a psychologist, and probably it will be interesting for her also. Thank you.
I don't know if there are other questions for Professor Bajc. Just checking, there is some raised hand.
Maybe one more, and then we head towards conclusion.
Yep.
I think.
Yes.
Alexander.
Also, please.
Yeah, you can call me both, Alexander or Alexander. Both are fine.
Both beautiful names. Anyway, so.
Yes. And my question is about the European regional organizations. There are quite many of them that deal with the protection of minorities, cultural diversity, languages, and everything. Have you thought of the potential of these European regional organizations in the course of protection of minorities? Oh, thank you.
I think they that organization. I think that they are quite important. I think that they are very important, not only that organizations of European Union, but also, for example, some projects like, for example, interethnic projects. I think the main point was with interethnic projects to that some researchers from the different countries or states they started to collaborate because in the past some countries were not didn't collaborate, they were in war. So that's some projects had that's very important topic, and organizations also. I think they will be very important in the future.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, thank you very much. So I give the floor to Valeria.
Now, very quickly, just to again, thanks to the speakers, thanks to everyone who inputted and stayed with us, and yeah, just to remind, so these lectures video will be hosted on the YouTube channel of the center, and we look forward to next opportunities to enter in conversation. I think it's a vast topic, that of minority. It'd be great to pursue it further with more, even more clout to the questions in plural. Yeah, so from me, it's all. If anybody would like to stay in touch with the speaker or speakers, we are also happy to facilitate that, of course. Please get in touch privately through our emails and other channels. Okay, and have a good day, everyone.
Have a good day. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you.